this border war. Fans call it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
5 receivers at Duncan's disposal. Duncan stepping up. Hit! Ball is loose!
Big ball here.
Marshall thinks they have it, and the Herd do!
Here's the kickoff from Amaretto Curry to the Hilltoppers, and we are underway, and a fake reverse on the kick return. And here comes Townsend down the left sideline. What a way to start it for Western Kentucky on the road, and it is an opening touchdown return, and just like that, the Hilltoppers strike first.
Justin Rohrwasser to try to win it for Marshall from 53 yards out. It's got the leg. It is good! And the perfect season continues for Justin Rohrwasser.
Goes for 2. Going for the win. Western Kentucky going for the victory. Rolling to his right, quick strike, and they did it! Western Kentucky has ended the perfect season into the hands of Willie McNeal. A shocker here in West Virginia, and it is over for Marshall. They end the regular season 11-1.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. I got Trace with me here this afternoon, and we are finally going to go to the defensive side of the ball with this series of position group breakdowns. We're going to kick things off with Marshall's defensive line and linebacker units. Trace, I guess before we get started, we've been putting out a lot of episodes really in a short period of time here because there's just a lot to cover and the season's quickly approaching. So I guess I need to remind everyone that if you miss an episode or you haven't been caught up and you go to the page and you're like, wait, where did the quarterback episode go? Where did the, whatever episode you're looking for, where did it go? Well, there's only going to be so many available through the Spreaker links and through the Spotify links, but you can get every episode that we have still on the Moonshine Throwdown podcast YouTube page. So if there's one that's not available through Spotify, just go to the YouTube, click the link, and start playing it, and play it right through your car speakers as you normally would. They give us unlimited space, whereas some of these other hosting sites limit what we can host at any given time. So I needed to get that back out there because we are putting out a lot of content. But Trace, defensive line and linebackers time. Let me get the generalities in here real quick, and then we can start talking about what the unit looks like. Phil still ranks this unit tied for second. This is defensive line right now. We're talking defensive ends and defensive tackles lumped together. We'll start with defensive line and then go into linebackers in the latter half of the episode. Defensive line unit tied for second with UAB. National rank, Trace, 52nd. Now, for those of you that are listening to both sides of the rivalry, getting a feel for all these position group breakdowns, you know that You'll hear the Western Kentucky defensive line episode coming out really soon if it's not already out by the time you hear this. They were tied, or they were not tied. They were first in Conference USA, and their national ranking along defensive line was 24th. Two very, very stout units between these two teams as far as defensive line goes. But that just goes to show you when it comes to Moonshine Throwdown time, if everybody's healthy and there's something actually on the line at the end of the season, this is going to be strength on strength. Defensive line for Marshall and defensive line for Western Kentucky. And it's going to really kind of come out to whose offensive line is in better shape at the end of the season. Anyway, total on the roster as far as defensive linemen go is 22. Not a lot of action for the Herd in the transfer portal from these position groups. Nobody portal out, and 2 guys portal in. Tyquez Legs from Austin P comes in as a linebacker in the 24/7 transfer portal, but it shows on the Herd Zone roster as a defensive lineman. And then Shane Simmons coming over as a redshirt senior from Penn State. Other losses, of course, along the defensive line. It's a pretty big one, Trace. Is Darius Hodge, who's making some waves right now with the Bengals, trying to earn a roster spot, doing really well in preseason. So we'll see if that can stick. All right, talk to me about thoughts on the defensive line as a whole right now before we start talking about these individual guys. What's on the roster now versus what was there last year? What are you expecting to see? All that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tied for second. Was that what it was? Tied for second?
Tied for second with UAB. Yep.
I think that's pretty warranted. I think that's a pretty fair spot. I mean, yeah, they did lose Darius Hodge, but they really do return a lot of guys that have a lot of playing experience. I mean, just looking on this, the roster here in the Phil Steele magazine, I mean, guys like Owen Porter, Jamari Edwards, Emmanuel Bush, Kobe Cumberlander, Sam Burton. I mean, those are guys that have played a lot of football. And, that's a really good nucleus of talent there on the D-line. And it's just like, honestly, before looking at the roster, didn't quite realize how many guys they actually have at that position. I mean, yeah, Darius Hodge is a big loss, and he's really doing, really good things in preseason NFL right now for Cincinnati. But outside of that, I mean, they really do have a lot of talent on the D-line, and it's definitely worth putting them that high in the conference, in my opinion. It's been a strength for quite a while now. I mean, it seems like they're always really stout on the D-line. They always are one of the top teams in the league and like sacks and different things like that. And I mean, there's no doubt that this is a pretty stout unit, I think. A couple different guys thrown in the mix as well that we'll probably touch on, obviously. So, I mean, it's a good strength. I mean, there's no doubt in that. It really needs to be that. I mean, that's where, up front, the trenches, that's key. And, offensive line's got a really good amount of talent, and so does the D-line. So Marshall's line of scrimmage is pretty strong, and that's been the case for a while. So I think that'll remain the same again this year.
Yeah, one thing you have to make note of is the fact that Marshall was really successful for a number of years under coaches J.C. Price and Cornell Brown. And now both of those guys are gone. J.C. Price is back at Virginia Tech, his alma mater. Cornell Brown has moved on to another destination. But in comes one of the best to ever play for Marshall, a MAC era guy, Ralph Street, who was was defensive coordinator at I think it was Florida A&M. So he's going to handle the entire defensive line now. Before it was a two-headed monster, defensive ends coach, defensive tackles coach type thing. And Ralph Street's going to handle the entire line. So J.C. Price was great. I mean, he was great for a long time. 8 or 9 years he was with Doc Holliday. Cornell Brown, when they brought him on staff, it just seemed to take that line to another level. Those guys had a lot of familiarity with one another. They played at Virginia Tech together, and now they were coaching together. So, they come from that Frank Beamer lineage, and, that high level play really came through in the Marshall defensive line for a number of years. So it's something to keep an eye on, but you're right. The cupboard is by no means bare. Darius Hodge is gone. He was a disruptive force for a number of years in Huntington. And it just goes to show you that this unit ranked tied for second in Conference USA. If Darius Hodge comes back, it's Marshall and Western Kentucky tied for first. And if Marshall's defensive line unit is already 52nd in the country, if Hodge comes back, are they pushing up there where Western is in the mid-20s in the nation?
Right.
Perhaps. So it's a big loss to fill the shoes of Hodge, but plenty of guys there that can do it. So let's talk about some of those projected starters. We'll kind of, this is where I'm going to try to deviate a little bit and do defensive ends and defensive tackles, because it's just kind of hard to, say, well, we think these 4 guys are going to start. We just know that's not really the case. I mean, a starter is a starter, but, second series, you could be getting subbed out. You just never know what happens. So, but yeah, we got to start defensive line or the defensive ends. You mentioned the guy, Kobe Cumberlander, 6'3", 227-pound redshirt junior, 28 tackles last year. 3 sacks in 9 games in 2020. And a guy you mentioned, local kid from Spring Valley High School, Owen Porter, 6'3", 232-pound redshirt sophomore. He had 14 tackles last year, 2 for loss and a half a sack in 10 games. So you start to see, even though there's not a ton of necessary production, not big gaudy numbers, 9 games, 10 games. I mean, these guys are appearing in a lot of games. So they've got some snaps under their belt. This should help, with the continuation of good solid play along the defensive line. Another guy we're going to talk about, Sam Burton, you mentioned, 6'2", 226-pound redshirt sophomore, 9 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks in 5 games. He played the opener, then was injured through the middle part of the season, and then finished up the last 4 games or something like that. They got Sam back. So, the stats are down for him, but he only played half the season. Shane Simmons is an interesting guy, 6'4", 246-pound redshirt senior, the guy coming over from Penn State. We'll see how he fits into the mold. But look, we say this a lot when we talk about transfers, especially guys that are grad transfers or coming in as seniors. You don't transfer somewhere to sit. So if you're going to make one more go of it, you're going to find a place that you think you can play. So at 6'4", 246, holy moly. You got to like that. You got to like that. So we'll see how he fits in the mold, fits in the rotation. And a guy that I know Marshall was really high on when he came out, Eric Mcduffie, 6'5", 246, redshirt sophomore. No stats in 2020, didn't appear in a game, but it's a guy now that was highly recruited, highly thought of when he came out. And now another year under his belt. We'll see if he can break into that rotation of defensive ends and start to make a name for himself along that defensive line. A couple of freshmen, that are on the roster that, may or may not be able to make an impact. One guy in particular you like to think is, my Lord, what a size on Emmanuel Balagun, 6'7", 253. Holy moly, Trace. If this guy's got any type of athleticism at all, it's something that, raises the eyebrows of Ralph Street. How do you not put a guy with that type of frame in the game? I mean,
Ryan B. like.
Very, very Ryan B. like, yeah. Daniel Foster, a 6'3", 228-pounder, and Elijah Austin, a 6'3", 248-pounder. Some freshmen there could start to break into the rotation a little bit more as the season goes along, but because let's face it, you can still play 4 games if you're in scenario type football and retain that red shirt year if you haven't used it already. So if we see the Herd blow some teams out, or, if injuries pile up, they can rotate these guys in for 4 games and still retain their eligibility. So just something to keep an eye on. Out of this defensive end unit here, these 6 or so guys that I listed, I think we know what we have in Cumberlander. We know what we have in Porter, and we've seen a little bit of what we have in Burton. How do you feel, though, about their, the ability to consistently get to the quarterback? There's not a lot of sacks up and down this list of guys. So that's a real area of need. I mean, it's a real area of need, and it's not something that Marshall has been overly good at the past couple of years. They've been fairly good at it. Is this a year, though, to where that changes a little bit, do you think, Trace?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, cause for a bit of, a little cause for pause, just because, Darius Hodge is gone, and he was really the only consistent guy that they had as far as edge rushers that could get to the quarterback. 6.5 sacks or whatever last year, and the year before he had that one game against ODU, and 2019 he had, I think, 4.5 sacks.
Yeah.
So, he's obviously was a very good player, but, I think that they'll be pretty good. And I don't think, like, production wise, it'll really, like, drop off that much, because it seems like Phil Still's pretty high on Shane Simmons in the defensive line, breakdown in his magazine and stuff. And it seems like he's pretty high on him. And, he has played at Penn State and, done some things there. So, I think that'll be a nice addition. Who knows? If he's okay, if he's, a noticeable player at Penn State, he could be really good at Marshall. You just never know. And, of course, like you said, Cumberlander's a pretty known entity at this point. I think there'll be big things from him. So I think the edge rushers it'll be a pretty good, amount of production this year. It might not be, they're probably not going to be a guy with 6.5 sacks or 4 sacks or in a game or whatever, but I could see him still. I don't think it's going to be that bad off. It's not. He has the whole D line at tied for second, so he can't think. Still can't think that one part of the line is going to be so much better than the other. It would have to be pretty equal. So I think that they'll be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, Kobe Cumberlander is the returning sack man now for the Herd. 3 sacks last year. Shane Simmons transferring in, he had 3 for Penn State last year. So, if you want to, you can get technical about it. So you technically have 2 guys, tied for the team lead, except that Simmons did that in a Penn State uniform. Over his 4-year career at Penn State, 59 total tackles, 24 of those solo, 10.5 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks. And gosh, a fair amount, 19 plus 15, whatever 19 plus 15 is right off the top of your head.
34.
34 career games at Penn State. So a lot of experience, a lot of ability. So we'll see if it translates to, like you said before, what the Herd's trying to do. But yeah, you got to think it's a pretty solid unit. Let's talk about some defensive linemen now, and it starts with Jamari Edwards, a guy that I picked to be the breakout player along the defensive line last year. And I think we saw that this year, preseason Lombardi Award watch list, Nagurski Award watch list, second team All-Conference USA in 2020, second team preseason Conference USA by Phil Steele. Edwards, the 6'3", 75 pound redshirt junior, 30 tackles last year, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble in 10 games. So he's a disruptive force along the middle of that Herd line. A guy, you need those guys. Every defensive lineman can't just be a run stuffer. You need a guy that can bust through and get to the quarterback. You need a guy that can consume 2 blockers, to let somebody else get free. And I think that's what we're going to see Edwards be able to do is suck in that second offensive lineman so that guys like Eli Neal that we'll talk about in a little bit, or Abraham Beauplan that we're going to talk about in a little bit, can get freer reign to the quarterback, can get burst through a hole and hit a running back in the backfield. So huge weapon for the Herd, Jamari Edwards. Emmanuel Bush, a guy you mentioned earlier, 6'1", 290-pound freshman. Nothing really notable last year. We'll see if he has a bigger role in 2020, but a guy that I think a lot of folks like in Huntington. So we'll see how he fits in. Another guy that has been a solid contributor over the years is Rodney Kroom, 6'2", 268-pound redshirt junior. He had similar numbers to Jamari Edwards last year. So that's definite nice feather to have. 26 tackles last year, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks in 10 games. Just a solid contributor. Will definitely be asked to have more of an increased role and to elevate his game a little bit, lining up beside Edwards and, depending on whichever side are on, whoever's playing defensive end as well. Esaias Carpenter, a 6'4", 285-pound redshirt junior. Love the build there. Love the height from the interior defensive line. One of those, get the hands up and bat down passes type dudes. 9 tackles last year, 0.5 tackle for loss in 9 games in 2020. And then TJ Johnson, another big guy, 6'5", 268-pound redshirt senior, 14 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble in 9 games last year. You run down that, and just like with the defensive ends, it's not necessarily blow you away type stats, but it's a lot of games. 9 games, 9 games, 10 games, 10 games. A lot of experience there, Trace. We've seen interior defensive linemen be disruptive. We've seen interior defensive linemen make it to the NFL from Marshall in years past. Do we have the makings here to piece together a solid 2 deep along the defensive line to come out of this thing, tops in the league when it's all said and done?
Yeah, defensive line, put it this way. I think that the middle of the line is definitely the more, secure, stable part of the line heading into the year. Now, it's not, like I said, it's not to discredit the the ends. It's not at all. But, I think the middle of the line has a lot more kind of known qualities about them. When you got a guy that was second team All-Conference last year, could end up being first team this year if he keeps improving. And then you got other guys, like you said, Kroom. A guy's been around a long time, has played football, a lot of football for Marshall. I like that. You got younger up-and-comers like Emmanuel Bush that, people seem to be pretty high on, and he did play quite a bit last year. So you just got a lot of guys that, have played a lot of football for him. TJ Johnson, he's been in there some. They got a lot of depth there, and that's a good thing. Even, Darius Hodge was the star of the line last year, but he wasn't out there in the middle of the line. He was rushing the edges. So the middle of the line really returns pretty much everybody. It seems like. So I think that's really where the strength of the whole line comes from, and I think that's the major focal point as to why Phil still picked them tied for second in the league. So at the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised at all if, whatever stats you want to look up, whatever you want to accumulate, they might end up being the best in the league. It's possible.
Yeah, we look at things you want to look at things like opponent rushing yardage and stuff like that, like that. It's not necessarily about sacks and tackles. It's being able to limit the playmakers from everybody else when you're talking about the defensive line. And of course, being able to get to the quarterback and, force fumbles and stuff like those impact type plays. But there are some freshmen on this roster that you could also see making instant impact. And one of those guys, of course, we talked about Tyquez Legs that's coming over from Austin P, was a linebacker for them, now moving down on the Herd Zone roster as a defensive lineman. So I don't know. You got to think with these measurables that he's going to play in the interior offensive line, 6'3", 320. If you can do that and rush the passer off the edge, then more power to you. But at 6'3", 320, I'm thinking, interior defensive lineman all day long. And a freshman that should raise some eyebrows a little bit, coming over from Lexington, Kentucky, out of Frederick Douglass High School, a high school that Herd fans should be familiar with. Actually, Moonshine Throwdown fans should be familiar with. Frederick Douglass High School head coach Nate McPeak, offensive lineman for the Herd from yesteryear. One of the assistant coaches on that team is Dante Key, father of Devin Key, the Western Kentucky safety all-timer. So, a lot of connections there with the Moonshine Throwdown and Frederick Douglass High School. But anyway, Jayshawn Kaufman is the guy's name, 6'5", 297. How you like that, Trace? True freshman. So this is a guy that could definitely see some time throughout the year. And if you can find a way to get that guy at least into 4 games and get him some game action experience, you got to do that. I would think you got to do that, because Marshall's not going to face anybody on the roster that's too vaunted. There are some games you must win and you can't take those type of chances, but we haven't seen Old Dominion play in 2 years. How good are they really going to be in, live game speed action? You're talking about the home opener. Who is that? North Carolina something, Central or whatever. How quickly is this game going to get out of hand to where you should be able to see some of these younger guys try to get some game speed in? Just some other names to pay attention to. So with all this being said and done, all these guys we're talking about, the unit, how solid we think it may be, could be. Who are you most excited to see from the entire defensive line in 2021?
Yeah, that's a good one, because we mentioned a lot of names, but I'm probably going to go with I know a lot of names, but I'll probably go with Jamari Edwards. I feel like this is kind of like his year to really kind of take over as, the top dog down, on that line. And Darius Hodges is gone. I know it's a different position, but I'd like to see, especially with coming off a second team all conference year, I feel like that's, going to lend itself to even more of a jump this year, I would say, especially now with Hodge gone, and you need somebody to just step up and really be the guy. And I'd like to think that that'd be the guy. Super talented guy. Maybe not the biggest guy out there for his position, for a defensive tackle, not many are 280 really. It's kind of like which Marshall's had a lot of success with, quote unquote, undersized D linemen over the years. They've had a lot of success with that. And I think this is the same type of deal. And I think it's going to be a very possible first team all conference year for Jamari Edwards. So that would lend itself right there to a lot of people wanting to see what he can do this year, for sure.
Yeah, he's my player that I'm most excited to see as well. And it sort of piggybacks off of what I said last year, is that I was most excited to see him, I said he was going to be the breakout player. And now I'm excited to see how that development continues. Could be a highly disruptive force, and it's not out of the realm of possibility at all to see, Marshall's Jamari Edwards and Western Kentucky's Jeremy Darvin to be your first team all-conference USA defensive lineman. They're both that disruptive and that good. But with all this preseason pub surrounding Jamari Edwards, and this being a position group, Trace, to where there needs to be a new superstar on the roster, right? Yeah. It was Darius Hodge last year. That's what everybody was talking about. He was the Herd star. And now, that position is vacated along the defensive line. So who's going to be the guy that is, when you think Herd defensive line, who's going to be the guy that pops into your head immediately? From some years ago, it was, Vinny Curry's the superstar on the defensive line. Ryan B's the superstar on the defensive line. Darius Hodge is the superstar on the defensive line. So who is it now? Is it? And I think it could be Jamari Edwards. He's the guy that's getting all the pub and is poised to be that next superstar on the Herd defensive line. This might be the easiest slam dunk of the day, Trace. Who's the biggest loss from the unit from a year ago?
Definitely Darius Hodge.
Being that he is about the only loss, but even if there were 6 or 7 guys, it would have to be the NFL caliber, defensive end. So yeah, let's just rinse and repeat and move on to the next one. All right. Now the interesting question, who do you think is going to be the breakout player this year?
That's probably the most interesting question, just because there's so many guys that kind of, I feel like can fill that role, but I'd probably go with Emmanuel Bush, just because, you saw kind of glimpses of some stuff from him last year. I mean, look at his numbers. He had a couple sacks and 18 tackles, it says. So, like, he got in there and, like, you noticed him. He wasn't a guy that was just like an afterthought. And, like, you noticed him as a young guy that you could see, a lot of potential in. And I think this year, now that he's got, another year under his belt, still a young guy. And I really think he could make a big jump this year. I mean, Jamari Edwards had a big jump last year, and he ended up getting to the second team All-Conference USA. So who's to say the same thing couldn't happen for Emmanuel Bush? I mean, I think he's that caliber of a talent. A guy that the teams are going to have to, focus on. Like I said, he's not just going to be an afterthought out there. He's not going to just be out there taking up space. He's going to be a factor. So that's the guy I would say that I think will probably be a really good candidate for breakout player.
Yeah, let me run down the full list of stats, since I didn't do that earlier when we were talking about him. Of course, 18 total tackles last year, just 3 solo, but still 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a handful of quarterback hurries. He was a contributor last year. So you're right. He played in 10 games. So another guy who played a lot of ball in his first season for the Herd last year. And, he's still listed as a freshman. So we'll see if he can take that up a notch. I'm not going defensive line for my breakout player this year. I'm going defensive end, and I'm going with a guy that I just absolutely love the attitude and motor of. And I'm going local. Give me Owen Porter out of Spring Valley High School. Love the dude. Love what the dude's all about. We heard it several times during game broadcasts last year where he may or may not have been a little too close to a microphone on the field and lets that excitement come out just a little too much for all audiences. But you know what? I love that stuff. I don't care. If you cannot, if you're not playing with an edge, then you're not playing ball. And this kid is playing with an edge. He's playing with a chip. He's playing to win. He's playing through the whistle. He's playing to drive you into the ground and walk away from you. He's that guy. He's not helping you up. Don't look for it. It ain't happening. So give me, Owen Porter and that 6'3", 232 pounds of freight train running at you. I love it. Who is going to be your MVP, you think, when it's all said and done?
Almost said Kobe Cumberlander, but I think I still got to say Jamari Edwards. I just feel like this is the time, like we both said, there's always, over the last decade or so, there's always that one undisputed, big star on the defensive line. We talked about the Vinny Currys of the world, the Darius Hodges and guys like that. This is his time. This is Jamari Edwards' time. And I really think that this is going to be the year that he really impresses. I mean, he impressed the conference last year, but when you start creeping up onto the first team and you start getting in that conversation for maybe even, maybe leading sack guy in the conference or conference defensive player of the year kind of talk, when you start getting up in there, you're really doing some stuff. And I'm not necessarily predicting that, but would it surprise me if it happened? No, it would not surprise me. So I think between him and Cumberlander both, that's a really good duo there. I mean, different, little differences, but they're both really good. But I'm going to go with Jamari Edwards for that. I think that's going to be the year.
Well, I was thinking that same kind of thing, but that ultimately landed upon Kobe Cumberlander because what I said earlier, I feel like Jamari Edwards is going to command help in the blocking game. He's not going to be, they're not going to put one hat on him and expect that to get the job done. So there's going to be opportunities for other guys to make plays because he's, having to taking on a second blocker. So 2 offensive linemen may have to be dedicated to him at times. You might get some kind of help somewhere to where guys like Kobe Cumberlander may get a freer run at the quarterback. And being that Cumberlander is the returning sack man on the Herd roster anyway, I think when it's all said and done, he may be the MVP of the league. And I know you might say, well, these opportunities are there because of Jamari Edwards having to take on that second block or having to, take on extra responsibility. So he's truly the MVP, but we'll just have to agree to disagree. Either guy is a great pick, but my reasoning led me towards Cumberlander. What is your hot take for the defensive line unit in 2021, Trace?
Yes, that's the one that I've been thinking about here recently. And I kind of had a couple things in mind, but I ended up settling with this one. I think that Marshall's defensive line between tackles and ends will contribute 3 players on the all-conference team. 3.
Wow.
It might be. Do they even really focus on beyond second? Do they even care about third team or anything?
No, I don't think so. But let me reel you in just for a second of something you may not have realized or remembered. Conference USA doesn't do 2 defensive ends and 2 defensive tackles. They do 4 defensive linemen, which is how we saw. I think it was it might have been Ryan B that got snubbed a couple of years ago because they put 3. I can't remember because they put 3 defensive ends on the first team one year or something I can't remember if it was B or not, but they do that. So be aware that that's a thing that it's a possibility to have 3 defensive ends, as the all conference first team. But I'm not trying to change your way of thinking, but I just wanted to put that out there that's the way this conference does it for some reason.
Yeah, well, I do remember that now that you mention it. But hey, if that's the case, that'll just make this take even harder. So you might as well I'm just still going to roll with it.
Okay.
I'll see Jamari Edwards, Kobe Cumberlander, and probably even an Emmanuel Bush or a Shane Simmons or whoever. They'll all crack on there. That's just what I'm going to roll with, and I'll throw it and see it. See what sticks. So there you go.
Well, that's the hottest take. If that's the reason, I can go ahead and round out the conference first team all conference defensive line for you because it's going to be Western's D'Angelo Malone. I mean, pencil him in. The preseason Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year. Yada yada yada. I'm not trying to make this a red towel type talk podcast, but you're talking about defensive line. USA ball without talking about D'Angelo Malone. It's gonna happen. So my hot take is that Marshall will in fact get to the quarterback better than they have been in years past. I can't give you a number because it's just who knows. But I think at the end of the season, when it's all said and done, Marshall's going to rank in the top 3rd in the conference in sacks. I just don't know who's going to how they're going to come to play, and that may not really be a total defensive line thing. But of course, we know linebackers kind of tally sacks and so do safeties and stuff like that. But that's just where I'm going with it. I think they're going to, top rank in the top 4 in sacks by the time the season's all said and done. So hang with us on the other side of this break. We're going to talk about linebackers. A lot of change there as well. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast.
Anthony rolls, and it's ball's deflected and out and intercepted at midfield. Picked off by Eli Neal, the middle linebacker. Anthony's arm and the ball hit as he threw. And Neal playing in the middle.
First down.
Gathered it in.
Linebackers time, Trace. A lot of, I don't want to say a lot of change, but another big loss for the Herd from the linebacking unit. Phil still ranks this unit 5th. Not a bad ranking considering that Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year, Tavonte Beckett, is gone. He was off to the NFL. Not even tied for 5th, just 5th. There's a lot of teams tied for 6th, so at least Phil thinks that this unit is a nod above, the next 3 or 4 teams that are tied for 6th. Total on the Herd Zone roster, 11 linebackers. Only action in the portal out. Now, look, I've noticed something, Trace. We do, I get a lot of information from the transfer portal page on 24/7 Sports. But they ain't perfect because there's guys that are gone or guys that have shown up that aren't on that portal page. So, I guess I should preface that by saying, again, this ain't perfect. This is just the information that I'm privy to. But the only guy listed on the portal out for Marshall is a guy by the name C.J. McCray. left and then went to Virginia Tech. So I guess he decided to follow J.C. Price to Virginia Tech. Nobody in coming in through the transfer portal, at least on 24/7 Sports' page. There could be someone that transferred in. And, of course, losses to Vontae Beckett. And, I don't want to put this on a sour note, Trace, but we can't talk linebackers and the Herd without mentioning once again that probably the biggest loss outside of on the field is Jaquan Yuli. We missed the guy. We were fortunate enough to have him on the podcast just 8 days before his fatal car accident. And, for however you want to measure his impact on the Herd, it's a big loss. So, he's still very much in our thoughts and very much, we think about him quite a bit. I know I do. When it just seems like I can't go too long without seeing something on social media or something. So, however you want to quantify that, it's a big loss for the Herd and a big loss for, all of his friends and family, of course, and the lives that he touched and the impact that he had on the game. But, back to this unit. 11 guys in, Trace, or 11 guys on the roster. Tavonte Beckett's the only one gone, and you got one coming on the portal out. There had to be some additions somewhere. They're just not on the portal page. So looking at this unit in a broad strokes perspective, please don't say, I think they'll be fine, because I'm starting to really despise that term. We'll be fine. They'll be okay. You're going to have to dig deep and find a different adjective and describe how you think this unit looks in 2021.
I mean, I don't think anybody has to say that they'll be fine, because I think it's a good unit. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's not like they lost, 10 people or 10 starters. I mean, or 3 starters. It's not like they lost one guy. I mean, Tavonte Beckett's, an absolute stud, and he's the best linebacker in the conference last year and probably the year before that. But it's one player, and I mean, they still have a lot of talent. So like, it's not like the unit's it's a total rebuild. They're having to go get guys off the street, and that's not the case at all. So like, I don't think you have to say this unit's fine. So I mean, I think they got a good amount of talent back, and a lot of guys that started stepping up last year. Your Bo Plans, your Eli Neals, a lot of guys that stepped up last year that really weren't on the radar. Now they're on the radar. Now they're guys that are really expected to do a lot of big things. And I think that's a great thing for this unit. They got depth. They got a pretty good amount of depth. I do think 5th in the conference is fair. I mean, if you want to really get picky, you could have said maybe like 4th, or maybe at best tied for 3rd, but I think 5th's fair. So, I mean, it's one of those things where some of the younger guys in the unit have to, prove themselves and prove that, the unit's still in good shape. But I mean, there's known entities there and guys that are going to be big impact players. So it's not a they'll be fine situation. I mean, you can say that about, seems like we always say that about receivers or certain positions like that, but I don't think this is it. I mean, linebackers is another unit that Marshall's been pretty stout in the last many years, really. I mean, it's probably the whole time Doc was at Marshall, they always had good linebackers. So it's always a strength. And I mean, even though it's a little less solidified now with Tavonte Beckett gone, I think it's still a strength. Just point blank, I feel that way.
Well, we're not looking at a scenario where you said like a couple of years ago where 3 starters graduated, and it was like, okay, who's going to be the carryover guys that step their game up? And the Herd managed to, fjord that stream. They managed to make it across that, no problem. Well, not really any problem.
Right.
Like your Omari Cobbs and guys like that stepped up, and Tavonte Beckett transferred in, and the unit really didn't miss a huge beat. There wasn't a big setback in production when you saw, gosh, who was it? It was like Chase Hancock and Frankie Hernandez. All those guys left, and it was like, whoa, okay, this was a stout unit that had a ton of tackles. Now what are they going to do? Well, that storm was weathered, and the Herd continued on at a pretty high level. And now, you're talking about losing the Conference USA defensive player of the year and an NFL caliber type linebacker. But there are guys here that showed last year that they're ready to be the next superstar. And this is one of those units, just like I talked about with the defensive line, that now there's not a superstar. Beckett's gone. Who gets to be the superstar? And I think we're getting ready to talk about him. So let's run down a handful of guys here and, see who the Herd fans might see trotting out as starters, and then who will be the first ones to come in when those guys need a breather or what have you. So the linebacking unit for me, it begins with Eli Neal. Came out of really nowhere to become a star player for Marshall last year. 2020 Conference USA honorable mention, third team All-Conference USA preseason by Phil Steele. Eli Neal, the 6'2", 223-pound, just a sophomore. 75 tackles last year, 19 solo, five tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, and a beautiful interception in 10 games last year. So he's producing across the board. Abraham Beauplan, a guy you mentioned, he really came on strong. 6'2", 223-pound junior, 55 tackles last year, 16 of those solo, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles in 10 games. Brian Cavalcante came over from, I don't remember. Was he
Delaware State, I think.
Yeah, I remember what conference. I'm saying I don't remember what conference it was, but 6'2", 213-pound, now redshirt senior, 17 tackles, 7 solo last year in 10 games. Charlie Gray, a 6'3", 207-pound junior, 79 tackles and 6 sacks for Butler Community College. Not a ton of, production really for the Herd, but he wasn't asked to do a whole lot last year. So we'll see how that goes this year. Jacorian Anderson, 6'2", 231-pound sophomore, 3 tackles in 9 games last year. Another guy that played a little bit. Appeared in a lot of games, but wasn't really asked to have to do a whole lot. So these are guys that are going to have to step their game up a little bit. So let's talk about these 5 guys, Neal, Beauplan, Cavalcante, Gray, and Anderson. This looks to be the meat and potatoes of your linebacking unit. Okay. This is, for better or worse, the 2 deep. So outside of Neal and Beauplan, it's, can somebody stand up, please, and be the third guy? So who do you think is going to be that third guy? I think we can comfortably pencil in Eli Neal as a starter, leader on the team, probably the next superstar linebacker. And Beauplan is just a tick behind him right now. So who's that third guy? Who do you think is the third guy?
Yeah, I think that's a good 5 that you mentioned there, but I'd probably say Cavalcante, just because I feel at this point he's played a lot of football. He's got a lot of miles under his belt, so to speak. I feel like last year his role was more special teams oriented, and that's fine. Marshall's had that's one thing that just from when we had Yuli on here, you have to be able to play special teams to prove yourself. That's how that's been the expectation and the standard, and he proved himself on special teams, so I feel like that's earned him more respect with the coaching staff. It's a different staff now, but I think he's a senior. Well, I know he's a senior. I think he's a guy that's going to be that's a nice kind of veteran, got a lot of, like I said, a lot of mileage, veteran leader type of a situation, and I think it's time give a guy a chance in there as a starter. Last year we really weren't sure what we would get with him, how much he would play or whatever. We just knew he was a new guy coming in. But this year, I think it's, especially, now that Beckett's gone, I think it's time for him to get a chance to start out there. Maybe it might not end that way. It just depends on who steps up, but at least give him a shot, and I think he'll be able to pass the test. So I'd like to see Cavalcante out there as the third guy. I think that's, it's a fair enough guy to put out there. I think he's earned a chance, so we'll see.
Yeah, of course, it's always going to come down to who's rising above during summer camp here. And we're closing down to the nitty gritty of it. Kickoff's not that far away. Some guys have had to have cemented their status at many positions. So I can't think that there are too many that are left, up in the air. But this, like every other position outside of offensive coordinator, this is a new position coach at Marshall. So it'll be a new type of philosophy, be a new attitude. Guys that were accustomed to a different coaching staff are going to have to, adapt to a different set of standards, a different, way of doing things. This is the linebacking unit is another one that is headed up by a former Marshall alum, or not a former Marshall, a Marshall alum, Shannon Morrison. So several stints in Huntington, and he's back again. So a lot of fans liked him when he was here in years past. Loved the job he did as a coach before, and now he gets to do it all again with the Herd linebackers. And he's got a talented group. So you got to love having guys like Eli Neal and Abraham Beauplan. You know what you got there. They tackle, they run down ball carriers, they can get out in the flat, they can play coverage. And Eli Neal's out there picking off passes. I mean, what was that? I think that was Louisiana Tech game, like 20 seconds into the game or something like that. He picked that pass. I don't know, but I remember it was a pretty nice athletic play. But anyway, so who the third guy to rise out of the crop to be that last starter will be, the big question mark. There's a guy that I've got to talk about here because in the process of doing the research for the show, I came across this story, and I bet you not a lot of players, not a lot of listeners have stumbled upon this. There's a guy on the roster for Marshall named Tyrique Bell, 6'2", 210-pound junior, JUCO guy, coming over from Saddleback College in South Carolina. He was in the National Division Co-Defensive Player of the Year there. 79 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery. Okay, if I stopped the story right now, you'd go, okay, great. Nice JUCO guy coming in, lots of numbers, lots of production. But, man, it gets so much better. Dig this, okay? Dig this. Following high school, Tyrique Bell enlists into the United States Marine Corps. Wow. Does 4 years in the infantry, okay? So this ain't just like pencil pusher sitting behind a desk. No. This is a frontline fighter. This is the infantry. Okay. You hear the term built different a lot.
Built different.
If you're an infantryman in the United States Marine Corps, you are built different, my man.
Wow.
4 years. So he's a little bit older of a guy, right? So now you leave high school. Let's say you're 18, you do 4 years. What's that? 22. Then you go JUCO for maybe a year or two, 23, 24. So this guy's in his mid 20s now at Marshall as a junior. Talk about a different mindset. He's seen some stuff. You know what I mean? He's been in a couple of deployments I think it said China and Japan maybe. So he's been places. He's done things. He's got life experiences that there's not another guy in this. I'm not even going to say just position group. There's not another guy on this roster probably that has had those types of experiences. Yeah. So that's an interesting guy to have on the roster. I am now very intrigued to see how he plays into the mix, and it would not surprise me if he rises out of the pack to see significant playing time and is a significant contributor because of being a little bit older, being a little bit more mature, knowing how to approach things already. You don't have to be coached on how to approach a situation. Like, he's already been there, done that type of thing. So one name to keep on the lookout for sure. A couple of freshmen we'll talk about, 3 of them really. Isaiah Finney as a guy that, recently committed. I say recently, of course, it's this year. Part of Huff's class. So one of his guys actually coming on campus, 6'1", 205, and a couple of local kids in the linebacking room that we love. We love when the local kids are around. So, I always want to highlight those and put a spotlight on them when we can. Jaden Johnson from Cabell Midland, right down the road, 6'2", 211-pounder, and Jordan Williams right across the river in Ohio, come from Fairland High School, 6'2", 233. So we'll see, how these guys all contribute. But man, I really like the shape of this unit. It's a big loss. You can't just dismiss the fact that Devontae Beck is not there. The guy was the best linebacker in the conference, period. Defensive player of the year. You can't just dismiss that. But I really like the guys that are on the roster right now. I think that Marshall is going to raised some eyebrows a little bit. I'm not sure that, number 5, I'm not sure they'll be at number 5 at the end of the year when it's all said and done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure a lot of that factor goes into the Tavante Beckett not being there. So, you got to say, well, how do you replace Defensive Player of the Year? Well, we'll see how they do that. Who are you most excited to see in 2021 from this unit, Trace?
Oh, I'd say Eli Neal. I mean, I just feel like this is the time where now the whole conference is going to know who he is. I mean, as last year, I feel like, Marshall fans probably knew he was going to end up developing into something pretty good, but I just don't feel like the masses within Conference USA knew that. So, I mean, I think Eli Neal's going to have a big, big year. I think that it's his time to really, really show out now that, it's the same situation as the D-line. Now that, the Darius Hodges gone on the D-line, it's time for somebody else to step up and be the guy. Now, the same thing with Tavante Beckett going in the linebacker unit. It's time for somebody to step up. And I think it's going to be Eli Neal. He's still, only a sophomore, but a super talented guy, a very versatile player. So, I mean, what's not to be excited about to see him in another year? So that's who I'm most excited to see.
Yeah, Eli Neal for me is the guy I'm most excited to see as well, just because we saw what he was able to do anyway. And now, going in and you're not necessarily asked to be the guy because Beauplan is no slouch. So to have a guy alongside you that can help take some of the load, and you guys can kind of be a 2-headed monster or maybe a 3-headed monster if somebody comes on like gangbusters. And, we see linebacker play that we saw from yesteryear when we were talking earlier, like Hancock and Hernandez and Cobb and guys like that. They were just like a well-oiled machine. Maybe we see a little bit more of that this year. I can't say that the unit will be stronger without Tavante Beckett because that's a very bold statement. But at the same time, I think they're going to be pretty damn tough in Conference USA. And leading the way for me is Eli Neal. I said it earlier, and I'm just going to stamp it. He's going to be the next linebacker superstar at Marshall. It's him on the, Beauplan could be as well. But for me right now, Eli Neal's the guy that is the next superstar linebacker at Marshall. Just like with defensive lineman, Trace, I'm going to give you the lob, and you get to slam it down with authority. Who's the biggest loss from the unit from a year ago?
Tavante Beckett.
From half court. Slam dunk. Yeah, it's Tavante Beckett. Again, just like Darius Hodge, rinse and repeat. When you're the only guy, you're the biggest loss. But, there could be 6 guys and he'd still be the biggest loss. Who's the breakout player this year? Who could be the guy that's coming out of nowhere to be the breakout player?
Yeah, I guess you could say Beauplan, but I think that was really him last year. I think that's really what he did last year. He kind of broke out, but so in that regard, I'm going to say Jaquan Anderson, the breakout player. I mean, it's too, because I think, last year, even though Beauplan he wasn't as, highly regarded as Beckett or Eli Neal, he still had a breakout year last year. Now, I'm not saying he can't have another breakout year where he breaks out even more, but I think now he's already kind of broke out. But I think Jaquan Anderson is not there yet. And I think, if you give the guy some chances in there, he really might impress. I mean, it just seems like he's got, he's very nice build guy. I mean, listed on here at 6'2", about 230. I mean, that's a good size for a linebacker. I think that if you give him enough chances, enough reps, enough opportunities, a breakout season could come of it. So, I mean, you just look at the stats from last year, there's nothing that's really going to blow you away. But I do remember that name from last year, seeing it out there quite a bit and just seeming like he's one of them, a bright up-and-comer. So maybe this is the year that we'll get to see that. And I think that lends itself to a possible breakout year. So Jaquan Anderson, I'm going to go with him.
Yeah, even though the stats aren't there for Anderson, he's played quite a bit of ball for Marshall over the past 2 seasons. 8 games last year, 7 games as a freshman. So he's been in a lot of game speed action. He's been playing at this level. And when you go all the way back to high school, he was pretty highly touted coming out. He was recruited by some of the guys, some of the teams that Marshall is on par with. It's not like it was Marshall and then the bottom of the Sun Belt was after this guy. No. It was teams like Marshall. UAB wanted him. Appalachian State wanted him. Western was after him. So there, these these teams that are on par with Marshall was after this
Yeah.
guy, and Marshall was able to come out of the pack and land him, and that's a pretty good pick. You know, a lot of ball, hasn't been asked to do a whole lot, but now you've got to be, if you're not comfortable in the system by now, you know, granted it's a new system, but if you're just not comfortable at this level, then I don't know that you're going to be. It's a good pick. I honestly, Trace, I just can't get past the story of the guy I mentioned earlier, Tyrique Bell. Everything adds up to me. This is a complete unknown. He hasn't been on the roster before. He's lining up for Marshall for the first time ever. You know, he's going through spring ball or going through summer ball right now. He's never been part of the strength program and all that. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter to me. I think this guy's going to be the breakout player. When you've had life experiences to the level that he's had already, I like the story. I like everything about it. So I'm going to go out on the biggest limb I think I've probably ever gone out on this podcast. And I'm going to say Tyrique Bell is the breakout linebacker for Marshall, a guy that has never put on the Kelly green and white until a few weeks ago. But I just can't get past that. I mean, 4 years in the Marine Corps out of high school, infantry, 3 different infantry battalions, and then goes to JUCO and becomes National Division Co-Defensive Player of the Year. Just give me that guy. He's a proven winner. So give me that. Give me Tyrique Bell. Yeah. Who's your MVP of the season when it's all said and done?
I think it's Eli Neal again. I mean, it just seems like that's where everything's trending in that direction. That's what it just seems like. I mean, usually heading into the preseason, you kind of have some ideas of what you think is going to happen, and you just see signs. And we saw enough signs last year of his play to think that this could be his year to really, really show out, especially now that Beckett's gone. There's not going to be anybody really to overshadow him necessarily. I mean, that might be a little too harsh of a term, but that's kind of what Tavonte Beckett does to people. He overshadows people. So now that Eli Neal's, not the only, but he's arguably the main guy on the line through the linebacking unit, it's going to be a really big year for him. And like we said, I mean, very versatile player, interceptions, can play in coverage, can, like you said, can run, get in the backfield, get to the quarterback. I mean, just a very versatile player. So I think he's got all the makings of having a huge year. So that's, in my opinion, I think he will end up being the MVP from the linebackers this year.
Yeah, you can call it a cop-out if you want, because he is half of my MVP. I think it's the Neal-Beauplan combo that's going to, the chemistry between those two guys, the ability to play together is going to be what is the MVP of the unit. Not just any one guy's stats over the other. Beauplan may end up with more tackles than Eli Neal over the course of the year. It's capable, it's possible, and it's, it's just as likely as Neal having more tackles than Beauplan. But I think the combination of the two playing together is what's going to be the MVP for the unit. So give me both guys. Call it a cop-out if you want. What's your hot take for the linebacking unit in 2021?
Well, it's a nice segue there with the co-MVPs, because my hot take is between Beauplan and Neal, they will combine for at least 120 tackles. That's and that might, to be honest, that's not entirely that hot. I mean,
it's really not. They combined for 130 last year. Bummer.
Okay, 150. I changed my mind. At least 150. I was going to say, sheesh, would actually verbalizing that, and that's not even that hot.
Yeah.
But well, I'm changing it to at least 150. And I mean, we've seen guys in the past, Chase Hancock, and different guys 100 plus without even question. So I think though, I'm upping it after you said that, and after I said it, it just didn't sound right. So you know what? Screw that. I'm going at least 150 combined tackles between those two guys if they're healthy.
Well, I like where you're going with that. And I got to say this might be a corny joke, but you were talking about that being a hot take and then not being that hot. I was thinking that's a hot pocket take, because that's hot on the outside and frozen in the middle.
Exactly. You think it's something that it's not.
Anyway, my hot take is that for the first time, in 2019, last year was the first time that Marshall didn't have a linebacker have 100 tackles And it was a shortened season. So it could have happened if they'd have played a full complement of 12, 13 games, but it didn't happen last year. But it was the first time since 2016 that Marshall didn't have at least one linebacker with 100 tackles. So 2017, 18, and 19, somebody had at least 100 tackles. My hot take is that someone will have 100 tackles again from the linebacker unit again in 2021. And in 2019, there were 200-plus tacklers on the team. That's a scorching hot take right there. So I've been off the rails a little bit with this episode. I'm out on the biggest limb ever with my breakout player. So I'm going to go with the scorching hot take, and I'm going to say Marshall has 200-plus tacklers from the linebacking unit.
I like it.
Yeah, that's a big scorching hot take. So look, Trace, it's nice to start talking about a little bit of defense. Defensive line and linebackers should be real strengths for the Herd in 2021, as they have been for a number of years. And, later on we'll bring the defensive backs and we'll sprinkle in a little bit of special teams as well. So this defense is poised to be really good again. I don't know that they'll be as good as they were last year or the year before because they were just locked down, shut down, but they are by no means porous this year. They're going to be very tough to score on. They're going to be very tough to rack yardage up on. And it's just a matter of, putting it all together in a new system, new defensive coordinator, new defensive position coaches. But you got to like where the Herd's at. So give me some final thoughts before we get out of here this week.
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well. I think the front seven, between the D-line and the linebackers, it's a strength again. Even with a couple major losses that we've mentioned, and we're going to keep mentioning those names until the season gets going and we see different guys. But this is still a strong points of the team. There's no doubt about that. And, we're talking about whether or not the defense would be as good as it was last year. Last year that defense was dominant. They weren't just good, they were dominant. The most points they allowed of the whole year was 22 points, and they were on the field for like 45 minutes out of the game. So that defense last year was straight up dominant. So they don't have to be that dominant. They don't have to be that good again for them to compete for a championship, because the offense, I think, will probably be better, or at least have some different qualities that they didn't have last year. So, the defense doesn't have to be as great as it was last year for Marshall to reach their ultimate goal. But if it's anywhere close to that, then anywhere close to what it was last year, look out, because this team could be really good again. At least, or maybe they'll finish the year this time, unlike last year. But the front seven, these two units are pretty stout. The defensive line, I think, is a little safer right now, just because there's more guys to work with. Linebackers, I think two of them are obviously set in stone, and the third guy, we still have to see who steps up. But there's definitely a good amount of talent still there. So I think both of these units will be in definitely good shape. And not to cop out and say they'll be fine. They don't need to necessarily be fine, because I think they're going to be good units. So and it's going to really help lead the charge for the defense. I'm excited to see what they can do.
Yeah, if you want to look, from a, I don't know, let's call it a bird's eye view of the field. Marshall's really strong up the middle. You talk about Jamari Edwards, Rodney Kroom, and Bush, and whoever else is in that interior defensive line, and you talk about Bo Plan and Eli Neal. They are really, really strong up the middle. And they're not going to be weak on the perimeter either, because guys like Stephen Gilmore can come up and make plays. You got Brandon Drayton that's going to come up and make plays. Micah Abraham can come up and make plays from those secondary spots. And we've seen guys like Eli Neal go out into the perimeter and track down ball carriers and, receivers in the flat. And, my breakout player along the defensive line, Owen Porter, we've seen what he can do as well. So, this is going to be a tough defense for teams to dissect. And I don't know that, very many are going to be successful in doing that consistently. Yeah, Marshall's going to give up yards and Marshall's going to give up points. You're fooling yourself if you think that they're just going to dominate every game from start to finish. They didn't do that last year. They played their asses off in a lot of games and still came up short. But the yin and yang of football and herd football in 2021, I think you're right, is that the offense will be a little bit better so that the defense doesn't have to be as good. And that's kind of what we needed to see. If the offense was a little bit better last year, well, Marshall's probably winning a championship last year, but they went sour at the wrong time, so when it went sour, it really went sour. So, all of that, of course, remains to be seen. And it never, we can sit here and talk about it until we're blue in the face, but until they start playing games and guys starting lining up across from one another, that's where the rubber meets the road. And we see who's players and who's pretenders, who's here to win and who's posing. And, I think Marshall's full of guys that are here to win. They're here to compete. It's an attitude thing. Anytime you see, a new coach, you see that attitude thing. You see intensity increase. You see expectations increase because there's a new hunger there and guys are wanting to prove themselves. So linebackers and defensive line, I think, ultimately will be good, solid units. They may end up be better than what they're rated by Phil Steele. It's hard to go much better than number 2, but it could be Western and Marshall at the end of the year, neck and neck in that number 1 spot. But I thoroughly believe that Marshall's linebacker unit's probably top 3 in the conference, even before we play a game. So we'll come back at you here later in the week or early next week, and we'll try to get in that secondary position group breakdown and a little bit of special teams we'll talk about. Then we'll have to get Trace's season predictions. And then, holy moly, Trace, it's a week 1 preview. Are you kidding me?
Goodness.
Strap in, folks. It's going to be a long, long, long season for some teams. I think Marshall's going to have, a pretty enjoyable season. So, Trace, take us out of here, and we'll get the heck out this week.
Go Herd.
Go Tops. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.